You are sitting by a fire 30,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now Siberia. Something is watching you from the Treeline. It is not stalking you. It is not hunting you. It is waiting, at a distance it has learned is safe, for whatever scraps you throw away. You do not know it yet, but that animal, and thousands like it across thousands of generations, is about to become the first species in history to voluntarily attach itself to yours. Not because you tamed it, because it decided you were worth the risk. That is arguably the strangest fact in the entire history of domestication. Humans didn't invent pets on purpose. The wolf invented itself into your life first. So how did we get from wary scavengers circling a Stone Age campfire to a species where nearly half of all households on Earth now share their homes with an animal that provides no food, no labor, and no material benefit at all? The answer stretches back tens of thousands of years, crosses at least 6 independent domestication events on 4 continents, and starts with an animal that was never supposed to become anyone's friend. Let's start with what that Siberian campfire actually represented, because the relationship between humans and wolves did not begin with anyone deciding to keep one. For most of human history, wolves were competitors, not companions. Both species hunted the same prey, both lived in social groups with clear hierarchies, and both were dangerous enough that the safest strategy was mutual avoidance. The idea of inviting one of these animals to sleep near your children would have sounded, to almost anyone alive at the time, like a death wish. Genetic studies published in the journal Science in 2013, using mitochondrial DNA from ancient wolf and dog remains across Europe, pushed the divergence between wolves and domestic dogs back to somewhere between 18,800 and 32,100 years ago, far earlier than the emergence of agriculture. This matters enormously, because it means dogs were not domesticated by farmers looking for livestock guardians. They were domesticated by hunter-gatherers thousands of years before anyone planted a crop or built a permanent settlement. The oldest widely accepted dog remains, found at Bonn-Oberkassel in Germany and dated to roughly 14,200 years ago, were buried deliberately alongside 2 humans, with evidence the animal had survived a severe illness for weeks, meaning someone had cared for a sick dog that could offer nothing in return. That is not a working relationship. That is something closer to what we would now recognize as companionship. But the archaeological evidence for the actual moment of domestication is frustratingly thin, because domestication is not an event. It is a process, and it likely began exactly where that Siberian campfire scene suggests, with self-domestication, not human intention. The leading scientific model, developed by researchers including Brian Hare at Duke University, argues that wolves domesticated themselves through a process called survival of the friendliest. In any wolf population, some individuals are naturally bolder around humans and less reactive to stress, a trait linked to lower levels of adrenal reactivity. Those bolder, calmer wolves could approach human camps and scavenge refuse without fleeing, gaining a reliable food source that wilder, more skittish wolves couldn't access. Over many generations, this created selective pressure favoring tameness itself, not intelligence, not hunting skill, just reduced fear response. A famous multi-decade experiment on Siberian silver foxes, begun by geneticist Dmitry Belyaev in 1959, demonstrated this directly. Belyaev bred foxes for a single trait, tameness toward humans, with 0 other selection criteria. Within just 10 generations, the foxes began displaying floppy ears, curled tails, and piebald coats, physical traits nobody had selected for, that also show up in nearly every domesticated species from dogs to pigs to cattle. The wolf, it turns out, didn't need humans to design a companion animal. Tameness alone dragged an entire suite of dog-like features along with it, purely as a genetic side effect. This self-domestication story explains the dog, but it raises an obvious problem. Not every animal domesticates itself, and not every domestication event started with a scavenging predator hanging around a campfire. Different animals, in different parts of the world, required completely different paths, and each one reveals something different about what humans actually wanted from the animals they led into their lives. Take the cat. Unlike the wolf, the cat's domestication story runs almost entirely through agriculture, not hunting camps. Genetic research published in 2007 traced all domestic cats back to a single wildcat subspecies, Felis silvestris libica, native to the Near East, with domestication beginning roughly 10,000 to 9,500 years ago, right alongside the earliest grain agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The logic here is almost mechanical rather than emotional. Stored grain attracted rodents. Rodents attracted wildcats, and wildcats bold enough to hunt near human settlements gained a reliable food supply, while humans gained pest control, entirely without either species intending to form a relationship. The earliest direct archaeological evidence comes from a 9,500-year-old burial on the island of Cyprus, where a human and a cat were interred together in a shared grave, deliberately positioned less than half a meter apart, on an island with no native wildcat population, meaning someone had to have deliberately transported that cat there by boat. Unlike dogs, cats show comparatively few behavioral or physical changes from their wild ancestors, and genetic studies suggest they were never selectively bred for temperament the way dogs were, which is part of why house cats today remain, biologically speaking, barely tamed. In ancient Egypt, animals occupied a uniquely elevated status that went well beyond utility. And Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, recorded that Egyptian families would shave their eyebrows in mourning when a household cat died naturally, and that killing a cat, even accidentally, could carry the death penalty. Mummified cats have been found by the millions at sites like Bubastis and the Saqqara necropolis, some kept as beloved companions, others bred and killed specifically as religious offerings, a grim reminder that the line between companion animal and commodity has never been simple or consistent across history. Move to ancient China, and a completely different independent domestication story unfolds around a completely different animal, the goldfish. Wild carp were originally farmed in China purely for food starting around 2,000 years ago, but breeders during the Qin dynasty began noticing and selectively preserving unusual color mutations, particularly a golden-orange variant. By the Song dynasty, roughly 960 to 1279 CE, keeping ornamental carp in garden ponds had become a deliberate aesthetic practice among the wealthy, and by the Ming dynasty, selective breeding had produced the first true goldfish kept purely for visual pleasure, with no food or labor function whatsoever, representing one of the earliest documented cases of an animal being domesticated for a purpose that provided humans with nothing except enjoyment. And here's something most people get wrong about the whole history of pet keeping. They assume it has always been about affection, the way we think about it now. It hasn't. For most of human history, keeping an animal that served no practical purpose was a luxury available almost exclusively to the wealthy and powerful. In ancient Rome, small dogs bred purely as lapdogs, ancestors of breeds like the Maltese, were fashionable status symbols among aristocratic women, documented in mosaics and written accounts from writers like Pliny the Elder. Medieval European nobility kept elaborate menageries and hunting dogs bred for companionship as much as function, while the vast majority of the population, if they kept any animal at all, kept one that worked, herded, hunted, or guarded, because feeding a creature that produced nothing was a cost only the wealthy could absorb. The shift toward pet keeping as a widespread, ordinary, cross-class phenomenon is startlingly recent. Historians point to the Victorian-era in 19th century Britain as the true turning point, when rising middle-class prosperity, combined with new ideas about sentiment, domesticity, and childhood, made keeping a dog or cat purely for companionship newly affordable and newly fashionable outside the aristocracy. The world's first dog show was held in Newcastle in 1859, and the founding of the Kennel Club in 1873 formalized something that would have seemed bizarre to nearly every human society that came before it. Breeding animals not for work, not for food, not for religious purpose, but purely for appearance and companionship, judged and ranked like art. From a bold wolf circling a Siberian campfire 30,000 years ago, to a scavenging wildcat prowling a Near Eastern grain store, to a color-mutant carp swimming in a Song dynasty garden pond, to a fashionable lapdog carried through the streets of ancient Rome. Every one of these stories starts the same way. Humans didn't set out to invent the pet. An adaptable, opportunistic handful of species simply discovered that proximity to us was a winning evolutionary strategy, long before affection had anything to do with it. And the affection came later, built on top of a relationship that started as pure, mutual, accidental convenience.